Dear students, welcome to the second session of our lecture on art history. This is the first session where we actually look at art in a historical context, and we look at how art can function in a political context. We start with the beginning of the 19th century, that is, we start with the year 1789. Now, why is that the beginning of the 19th century? Because by now, at the moment, we are considering, or we are looking at time periods not as defined by numbers, so not 1801 to 1900, but as defined by events and developments. And a very important historian, Eric Hobsbawm, successfully proposed that we consider the 19th century to last from the French Revolution until 1918, until the end of the First World War, and another spate of revolutions all over large parts of the world, taking down a lot of empires and a lot of colonial rules also. That is why we speak about the long 19th century, and we also speak about the short 20th century that lasts from the end of the First World War in 1918 until 1989, until the war came down, until the end of the Cold War, and until the end of the world order, until the end of the world order in the way it had been defined by the two world wars, which, according to Hobsbawm, should be considered as one war with a very, very long armistice in between. And he has his points. So, I warmly recommend that you read Eric Hobsbawm's The Age of Extremes, a lovely, wonderful, enlightening book about the 20th century. And that helps understand a lot of things that were going on, and that also was written by a person who, one morning going to school as a kid, saw in the headlines that Adolf Hitler had been elected chancellor. That was in Berlin. So I really recommend him. Read it. It is also very, very readable. So, long 19th century, short 19th century, French Revolution. We start with the French Revolution. It is impossible to sum up the French Revolution. There are big books written about the French Revolution, and if I wanted to start really going into detail about the French Revolution, I'd have to read more of those books, and also we would run out of time very quickly. So let's just say, French Revolution, July 14th, 1789, started as a proletarian riot, started as a food riot, more or less, started in the market. And the women from the market then, who started the riot, went and took down this old prison in the middle of Paris with practically no prisoners inside, but it was a symbol of royal sovereignty and of the power of the state. So a genuine proletarian riot, which then gathered momentum, turned into a revolution, a system-changing rebellion led by the bourgeoisie, who wanted more rights, who wanted more agency, who had all the money but no power, and who used that occasion to make a move for power. And it ended in a bloodbath, and finally in a new empire with another crowned sovereign, though that sovereign, of course, hadn't been born into the nobility. That was Napoleon Bonaparte. The important thing is, what we have here, as I said, is the step from food riot to the middle classes, the merchant classes, demanding more rights and demanding a new system and actually changing the system, down to, which happens all too often, the revolutionary forces, the different revolutionary forces turning against each other. And in the end, we do not have a republic anymore. We again have a state with a crowned head. That's what happened. So, and we today have a look at the work of Jacques Louis David, who is still today considered one of the most eminent painters of the time, which means, according to my definition from last time, that still today he's considered as one of the artists who managed to sum up the problems and the subjects that were being discussed at the time. And which also excited. I mean, he got a lot of attention at the time. He started as a protege of the royal government. He received royal commissions. Then the revolution happened. He became something like the painter of the revolution. And in the end, he became a kind of, not officially, but he painted Napoleon's coronation. He was not a court painter, but it was close. Different from many other revolutionaries, he managed to die of old age. So let's have a look at the work of Jacques Louis David, or at least at two of his most discussed works. And let's first look at the work, and then let's look at the background, at the context, and try to understand these objects, these paintings, in a political context, how they functioned. So, let's have a closer look at this. This is the monumental painting, The Oath of the Horatii, or Les Sermons des Horaces, by Jacques Louis David. Please look at it. It's huge. It's 3 by 4 meters. It was not meant to be on display in a private home. This is meant for public display. This has monumental measurements. This is for a display in a place where larger crowds of people can see it. That's not for your bedroom, not even for large bedrooms at the time. Okay, what have we here? We have a group of men, obviously taking an oath. 3 of them, very decisive stance. Look at those muscular lower legs, look at the arms, and look at the rigid bodies. In front of them is one older man holding 3 swords, and you wonder how he manages not to cut his hands. Obviously, exhorting the 3 younger men, probably holding some important speech. And in the background, we have a lot of weeping women. 2 younger women weeping, and in the background, a woman in black cradling 2 children in her arms. And in the background, we have 3 arches, classical arches of the most simple variety, which means that at the time, everybody who knew something about art history and antiquity and architecture could identify them as early Roman times, because later Roman works tend to be much more ornate. It's like a backdrop, the whole is like a stage. The lighting is also like on a stage. You have the strong spotlight coming from the left, throwing its light first onto the group of the men, and behind them, the mother, the woman with the 2 children, is in the shadow, and some remaining light is cast upon the 2 younger women who are there in, let's say, soft positions of abandon and sadness. This painting was painted in 1784 after Jacques Louis David came back from his stay in Rome, where he had been sent on government money as an award to study antiquity. And it was immediately a huge success. It had been commissioned by the cultural minister of the royal government. I mean, that was the cultural minister of Louis XVI, of Louis XVI. So, how come? Why did people like this so much? In order to better understand what people found so impressive and striking about the Horatii painting, and probably also refreshing, it makes sense to have a look at the style that was fashionable before the advent of neoclassicism. And I've picked one for you. I've picked a work by Jean-Honoré Fragonard, which is quite well known. A number of you may know it. It's called The Swing in English, but the actual title is The Lucky Incidences of the Swing, Les hasards heureux de l'escarpolette. It's from 1767, so it's just 17 years older than The Oath of the Horatii. It's smaller in size. It's 80 by 64 centimeters. Today it's in the Wallace collection in London. Now, have a look at this. It is completely different. The whole impression is different. Look at the light, this misty, filmy pastel, soft light. Look at the composition. Look how the composition is like a cloud, or like a vortex of clouds moving. Everything is movement. Nothing is rigid. Nothing is solid here. And in the middle, I mean, in this spiral movement of air and vegetation, is the back and forth movement of the swing. And everything here is frothy and frilly and in movement. So in the center of the image, you have the lady on the swing in her flying pink skirts. And in the back, you see a gentleman in the shade, who's obviously pushing the swing. And in the front, you see another gentleman hidden in the shrubbery, who seems to have, let's say, very advantageous perspective, because he's peeking right up her skirts. You see, it's a completely different subject matter. So this is an erotic game. This is an important painting which is just about looking up a girl's skirt. And she's obviously enjoying it, important point. And the story about this painting was that the gentleman in the background is supposed to be the lady's husband, while the gentleman in the front is supposed to be her lover. And she obviously is having a funny game with both of them. She's even throwing her little pink shoe off her foot, so, which is always, you know, the foot, there's always an erotic thing. That the point is that in reality we have here the images, the likenesses of a rich man, a rich and powerful man, and a woman who was his mistress, which was probably an okay position at the time, much better than working in the fields or whatever. But of course, she was dependent on him. That is the real power structure, and this power structure is obscured and hidden by the painting, which presents the desirable, beautiful lady as the person who is able to play her little games, as the person who is actually in control. Let's get back to the Horatii. Compare in style as well as subject matter. Look at this. 17 years in between, and there are worlds. There is a world of difference. Look at the Horatii. No frills, no lace, no fun, no eroticism. Everything is solid and austere and simple and strong and about serious matters of the state. There's no erotic game here anywhere. Yeah? We don't know where the children come from. It must have been a mistake somehow. And of course, in comparison with this misty depiction and the movement of the brushstrokes in the Fragonard, everything here is very clear, well lit, austere. The shapes are so well defined. Look at the architecture. Yeah, everything is right angles. Even look at the pavement. Look at the clarity of the light, of the shapes, and how reduced everything is, how there is nothing superfluous, how there is nothing frivolous about this. And apparently this is what people wanted in the 1840s. They went for it. They went for the strong lighting, they went for the simplicity, and the simplicity also goes with the subject, because the subject here, the Oath of the Horatii, is a story from the early times of Rome. And remember, early Rome, that was the myth that the late Romans told about their origins, was all about republican virtues. It was all about homespun garments, about simplicity, about economy, about, prudence. It was the early Roman virtues were the exact opposite of what the high nobility enjoyed in the late 18th century. So, the story behind the painting is, as I said, the story of the Horatii that goes back to, I think, the 3rd century before Christ, when Rome was basically a small settlement somewhere in the swamps in southern Italy, and they got into a conflict with a neighboring settlement of Alba Longa because they kept stealing each other's cattle. As simple as that. Later on, it was made into a legend, but actually they were just cattle thieves. They were more or less cowboys, but they had really, really good poets who wrote about them and made this cattle thieving into a big story. So, conflict between Rome and Alba Longa, war is threatening, but at the same time, both cities are under threat from the Etruscans further north, like in Tuscany. And they knew if they started a war, the Etruscans would move in and take both cities, and that would have been it. So Alba Longa and Rome, instead of, I don't know, allying themselves or whatever, fighting the Etruscans or just keeping their peace instead, they agreed to have it out in personal combat. Each city agreed to send 3 fighters who would fight to the death, and the survivor would be the victor, and when their father is taking their oath that they will fight to the death. This moment is not described in the story. It was entirely made up by David, but it is kind of a dramatic culmination. This is the moment, okay, these 3 men are swearing, they're taking an oath, a solemn oath, that they will fight to the death for their city. And now you know why the women are crying, because they know that the chances are good that they will not see their brothers again. Plus, they're going off to kill 3 guys from Alba Longa, and actually these 3 women are, one of the 2 Horatio's sisters was actually the fiancée. She was betrothed to be married to one of the brothers from Alba Longa, and actually one of the Horatio brothers was married to one of the sisters of the fighters from Alba Longa. So it makes no sense at all that they would fight each other, or maybe it makes sense because they are, they were family and families fight, but normally not to the death. It is very probable, the lady in black in the background with the kids, because she was already married. So, and she already had kids, and she is already wearing the black garments of mourning, because whatever happens, hers is always a bad lot. Either her husband gets killed, or her brother, or both. Which is actually what happens. Where the story goes, the Horatio brothers went and fought the brothers from Alba Longa, and 2 of them were killed instantly, managing to wound the Alba Longa brothers, and then the 3rd Horatio pretended to run away and then slaughtered the Alba Longa brothers who were coming after him, not together but one by one, because they were differently, they were all injured but in different degree. So he killed the strongest and fastest first, and then the last one with the heaviest injuries he killed last. And then he came back home, and Rome was victorious, but his family was in shambles, and that is actually why the women here are weeping. So, this story, the story of the Horatii, is a story about loyalty to the state above family. And stylistically, in this painting, it is a story about virtue, about the virtue of fighting, that is more important than personal attachments. And stylistically, it is about austerity and about, this is like playtime is over, mates. Now let's get serious. This is what the style of this painting says. This is also what its subject says. And interestingly, it rang a strong chord with the French, or large numbers of the French in 84. Interestingly, from all political directions. So, as I said, it was commissioned by the cultural minister of the royal court, and they loved it. because it was obvious that the monarchy was in crisis. And the idea was, yes, what we want is loyalty to the state and to the government. That's not all that whining, or all these merchants demanding more rights. No, what we want is manly loyalty to the state, and let the women weep. Let's stop with all that womanish stuff. You see that here we also have identification between men and state, and women and private concerns and family, and also weakness. And of course, if you look back at the Fragonard, you can understand, right? You can understand. Okay, they were sick of this playful attitude and of waste and pomposity, and there were real problems that need to be addressed. And yeah, the question is, were they or were they not? So the opposition also loved the painting because they interpret it as, yeah, now let's get down to work. Let's down to the nitty-gritty. We want the state to be and the government to be serious. We want them to address our economical problems. We want them to address the problems of the interior. We want them to stop playing around in Versailles. We want them to be real. This is in this painting. Very short summary. It is much more complicated, but basically this is it. And you see how the subject matter, like a story from Rome that is reinterpreted by the public in contemporary terms, in their contemporary terms, as a story about the state or as a story about new politics that are needed, how this is connected with the representation. It doesn't make sense to make a pinkish, frilly, frothing, funny little erotic painting about a demand for a strong government, about a demand for austerity, about a demand for better politics, for more rights, for demanding a government that would address the problems of economy and the interior.
And this is actually an example of what, in my last session, I called well-made, and what we had a discussion about, You have here a striking image that's interesting to look at, and where the subject matter and the style link to the discussions of the time, and people connected to it, and they saw their own concerns about their country and their own needs for a change of politics and culture. They saw them mirrored in this new, austere, neoclassical style that for them was connected to a very specific set of virtues that they associated with early Rome. Simplicity, honesty, piety, prudence, respect. And also, the willingness to fight for your state at the expense of your personal concerns of your family. And this connection of content matter, of style, and the connection to contemporary matters.
That is what makes a work of art that works and that affects people. And if it provided it becomes public. If nobody can see it, it can't work. As we said, as Marie de France said, it cannot unfold its blossoms, right? If she said, let me translate, she said in the 14th century, she said, when you have done something special, it needs to be talked about so that it can become famous and it can unfold its blossoms. And this is what happened to this canvas by Jacques Louis David. It was shown to a large public, and there were immediately big discussions about this going on because it linked into the political discussions of the time. Good. Now, we jump ahead 25 years. We jump ahead and have a look at the coronation of Napoleon. Yeah, 1784-85, Serment des Horaces, Oath of the Horatii, story about ancient Rome, reinterpreted in terms of contemporary politics as a need for a male willingness to sacrifice themselves for the state and a need for, otherwise, for simplicity. For austerity. What happens next is 1789, 4 years later, is the French Revolution. The citizens topple the state. There is a system change. In 1792, the king is beheaded, is publicly executed, so is the queen, and after them, more and more of the former nobility, and then after them, the revolutionaries start executing each other. And then finally, Napoleon, a general in the army, because of course when you have revolution, you start war, takes power, seizes power, and finally becomes the new sovereign. That is 25 years later. Jacques Louis David has had a distinguished career through all dangers, through all, yes, revolutions in the sense of revolving situations of his times. He is well known, personally known to Napoleon, and Napoleon actually, it is said, personally, in a conversation, asked David to make this painting of Napoleon's coronation in 1803. Yeah, now look at it. Okay, this is different, right? Same painter, 25 years later, one big revolution later, and now we have this painting. Compare it to the one before. You see, okay, we're not back to Fragonard's funny little games, but we're also long shot from the republican virtues of ancient Rome. The whole thing is taking place in a church setting. You see, I mean, it is monumental in size, 6 by 9 meters. It is, everybody is bristling with gold and jewels. This is so far from the homespun Roman dresses from the other painting. You have huge amounts of people. A lot of them can be personally identified. And in the middle, bathed in light, the only one, like an apparition in white is Napoleon Bonaparte himself, who is already crowned, who is wearing the golden laurel of the emperor, and who is about to put the crown on the head of his wife, Josephine. The Pope is invited at the back to look on. We also have the bishop, various bishops here. So the cleric, which was out of commission during long stretches of the revolution, which also, they didn't just execute the king, they also tried to get rid of the church as an instrument of exploitation and of enslavement to the people. But now they're back in full throttle. And also, the family is back. When you look at the lady in white in the back, sitting in the green box, looking out, that is Napoleon's mother, a woman from very simple circumstances, very much cherished by him, who actually wasn't even present at the coronation because at the time Napoleon had quarreled with his brother and his mother sided with his brother and she didn't come. But in the painting she had to be there. And as you see it, she has a more important position than the Pope. So much about the importance of mom. You see, 25 years, complete change of values. You have abundance, you have display of power, you have a personality cult focusing on Napoleon. There is nothing here of loyalty to the state above the person or above the family. This painting here is about personal power, the new empire that is personified in Napoleon. It is about all his family ties, and it is about his connection with the church, though it is very clear who has the upper hand here, and to the old and new nobility. This is as much about representation of power as it gets. So, in a way, you could say we have come full circle. Of course, the Napoleonic Empire was very, very different from the Ancien Régime before the revolution. Goes without saying. But in comparison to the call for simplicity and virtue, the coronation of Napoleon, the Le Sacré de Napoléon, is very much about power and about a personality cult. It is equally famous. It was equally famous and popular at the time. And of course, it is not as simple as that, because many people saw at the time, and even after, saw the virtues of the revolution embodied in Napoleon. And of course, there were reasons why he seized power, and of course the official version was that he did it to protect the revolution. And it may even be true, it may even be true that if Napoleon hadn't done it, the reaction might have seized power and reinstalled the former monarchy and tried to reinstall the former elite. While with Napoleon, there was a new form of state, a new kind of monarchy, and a new elite. That is part one.